Blacklight Emissary, and today's video is going to continue our Iceberg discussion we've been having the last few days, last week or so. If you're new, welcome. If you're not, then thank you for being here and supporting the channel. More and more of you are showing up every single day, and it's cool to see kind of just organic growth on the channel, especially when I haven't been as active as I'd like to be on the channel, but I'm still here and I'm still going to continue getting stuff out there from my perspective on this universe, and I hope you enjoy the video and subscribe if you're new. Welcome, and we will continue where we left off. You can find part 2 and 1, I'm sure, as suggestions to this video, and I will put a card here for you if you want to go to those videos. I wouldn't exactly call it a requirement though. These aren't in any particular chronological order you need to have seen the other two for, but it is part of that series of the same Iceberg, so just thought I'd throw that out there for you. Alright, so we left off on part 5 of this, and the first one is the Watchers in the Dark are squats. So, the Watchers in the Dark are probably one of the weirdest factions in 40k. Not much is known about them. They are related mostly with the Dark Angels Legion and chapter of Space Marines, and what they look like is essentially imagine the Jawas from Star Wars, kinda, sort of. Jawas kind of a mysterious, you can't see their figure except for their eyes. Well, the Watchers in the Dark are much like that. The biggest difference is they don't seem to really have any features at all. No eyes, nothing like that. They don't seem to speak straight up English, but High Gothic in 40k, but I digress. They don't seem to speak a language that most understand, except for the Dark Angels. They do communicate with them, though. There is a lot more unknowns about the Watchers than there are knowns, and here are the things we do know about them. One of the main things is that they seem to be major enemies to Chaos, to the point where demons that have ran into Watchers in the Dark choose to avoid fighting them, and it describes them as not being able to feel fear, but they feel as close to fearful as they can of Watchers in the Dark and will not engage with them. They seem to possibly be extra-dimensional beings, or beings that are at the very least projecting themselves into the small forms just as representation of themselves. Now, that's not their true form. And then beyond that, they seem to have been helping influence humanity a long time and seem to be kind of like almost guardians for humanity against Chaos at the very least, and they will often show up to help forces that are fighting Chaos, and so they're in complete opposition to Chaos, and they seem to have some powers and immunity to Chaos as well, seemingly. Nothing at all indicates they're related to the Squats, who were kind of like a dwarf-styled race that was destroyed by the Tyranids in older lore. And then these days we do have technically a resurgence in the Squats with the newest faction that got revealed, the Leagues of Votan, which we don't have too much lore yet on, but this seem to be kind of like have some holdover technology from the Dark Age of technology, which is the biggest allure for me to them. But there's no sign of this faction looking like or acting like anything like the Watchers, and there's no overlap on their abilities or anything like that we've seen so far. I think someone took the overly simplistic approach of, well, they're both short, so that's my theory, and that's just not a very good one. The next one is also not a very good theory, and I don't know where this comes from, really. The Lost Primarchs became Gork and Mork. So, the Lost Primarchs are human, like human creations. The Emperor created them. Gork and Mork are the gods of the orcs. I don't know why there'd be an overlap here. I mean, the warp is weird, and you can claim, I guess, that some beings that ascended into the warp could retroactively go back through the warp and become worshipped or something, but there's nothing at all indicating anything like that. And the orcs were invented, were created, along with the Eldar, millions of years ago by the Old Ones. They were made in response to Chaos and in response to fighting the Necrons way back during the War in Heaven. And the orcs used to be the Gork, which are a high-tech version of that species and very deadly. and then they devolved into the orc species we are familiar with in Warhammer 40k. And the orcs have a very simplistic view on life. They like to battle, they like to fight, and Gork and Mork symbolize that. One is cunning and brutal, and one is brutal and cunning. That's kind of the simplified version of what they are. And then beyond that, we don't really see Gork and Mork seem to intervene or dabble in the real world like we see the Chaos Gods do. They seem to be much like the orcs, where they just kind of probably fight each other, like the orcs mostly fight each other still. The orcs are kind of like a self-fueling engine in that they actually tend to kind of keep themselves going by fighting. If you were to like stop an orc from fighting and keep them isolated, they might honestly die of like depression or something weird like that. So them fighting each other a lot in their empires helps kind of keep that engine running, so to speak, for that species. And Gork and Mork fighting each other in the warp often probably is the same exact reflection of that as a species. How the Lost Primarchs became Gork and Mork, I don't know what that theory would entail. I couldn't really find anything online that speaks to it, really. On the appropriately named forum, dakadaka.com, there was someone just mentioning from a few years back that there was some kind of theory that the missing Primarchs might have landed on orc worlds during the Great Crusade and became so renowned in combat against the other orcs that they maybe were like seen as like representations of Gork and Mork, but there's literally nothing indicating that at all. So it just seems like pure unconnected speculation, which is the worst kind in my opinion. Like, you gotta have a basis for your theory that is other than these two things exist in the same universe. It's like, you know, like I believe this rock is related to this mushroom. Why? Because they're both on planet Earth. Like, that doesn't, there's just, you gotta have a bit more of a closer relation than that, I feel like, to make a theory. So, not a very good one here. Next is just straight up lore, the Daemonic Culaba. And this is a infamous, famous bit of lore from 40k. It's from, I would say, an era of 40k that was a bit darker minded than now. A lot of people feel like that the grim dark part of 40k has kind of eroded over time, and that we're almost in a grim bright phase almost, with like Robout being back, with the other loyalist Primarchs probably coming back, with almost like a resurgence of humanity almost, where, you know, like a lot of the stuff in the older novels was, you know, there was no hope at all the Primarchs are gone, we're just fighting a very losing war, and now it seems like that might not be completely the case right now, in the lore at least. And so with that being said, this comes from that earlier era of the mid-2000s where it felt like every book was kind of its own flavor of grim, and the book that the Daemonic Culaba come from is no exception. That book is Dead Sky Black Sun by Graham McNeill. It is one of the novels of the Ultramarines Omnibus, and that entire book takes place essentially, for the most part, on the demon world of Medrengard, which is the Iron Warriors world in the Eye of Terror. And so if you are unfamiliar with that book, I would recommend reading it because it's a really good one, a really fun departure from some of the normal settings in books, I would say. But I'll give you a brief description of this world and what goes on it. So the world, the book is named aptly enough. The sky is like a dead gray, milky color, and there is a sun in that sky that is like pitch black. It's like a black hole sucking everything into it. And so you kind of have that kind of bleak atmosphere. The world itself kind of gives a Mordor vibe a bit. Like, it's very tall, craggy peaks of mountaintops, gray, featureless desert, and then scattered across the world are the citadels of the Iron Warriors themselves, and, you know, giant towers of their warsmiths that are used as bastions and repositories for their armies, essentially. There's a great dark city that exudes hatred. That seems to be the place where Perturabo himself, their Primarch, is toiling away, it is said. And then you've got the warsmiths basically fighting wars of ego and territory wars against each other when they are not united in raiding the real world for supplies or other objectives. And in all of that, the Daemonic Culaba is part of that. So in this book, in one of those fortresses, in its depths, is essentially a scheme to create more Space Marines for the Iron Warriors. And that involves taking a regular person and sewing them up in the innards of these giant bloated demon things. I don't even know what exactly they really are. They look like slightly feminine, but bloated and almost Nurgle-esque in largeness, probably. I'm talking about like a greater unclean one for Nurgle, which are like just, big bloated creatures, kind of like that. And you get sewn up in it, and it's supposed to help grow you into a Space Marine's body, essentially. And then these experiments have had great failures in the form of beings called the Unfleshed. And they would be flushed out of the sewer system of this tower, and then they would essentially, the Unfleshed would come and gather up any that were offcast from this process, and they kind of created their own tribe of monstrosities on this world, and would just hunt whatever meat and things they could find to survive. And it turns out they were also still loyal to the Emperor as well, so they make a run-in with the main character, the Ultramarine, Aurel Ventress, that the books follow, and a lot of them are kind of intimidatingly large and in stature because, it was a process to make Space Marines. So imagine something bigger than a Space Marine, also unfleshed and no skin, but could still probably tear apart a Space Marine if it wanted to. These were the kinds of things. I remember there was one with, I think, multiple heads, though, and moved on all fours. There was a lot of just kind of nightmarish-looking forms. If you've ever seen the game Scorn, I kind of imagine they looked kind of like that from those games. There was some interesting-looking body horror in that game. I imagine that the Daemonic Culaba and the Unfleshed would fit right into that world, for example. The fortress this all took place in, where these were created, where the Unfleshed were created, and where the Daemonic Culaba is what's called Colin Gol. It was the fortress world of a warsmith named Hanzo, who is still around despite the tower being destroyed by a demon of Khorne during the events of that book. But so it's likely that the process with the Daemonic Culaba is gone, and so that nightmare is. And so the universe is a slightly less nightmarish for it, but anyway, some pretty good lore from this entry. This one's just, it's been, over the years, it's been a strong, just reposting everywhere for, look how, hardcore Warhammer can be. And, I agree with that to an extent. I feel like when I read it the first time, and I read it when I was a teenager at the time, I remember it being nightmarish for sure, but I guess to me it just, I don't know, it didn't quite come across in my mind at the time the true horrible implications of what was going on, I guess. Now that I think about it, yeah, it is truly a really cool, nightmarish plotline for Warhammer. A lot of Warhammer kind of brushes over the horror in a odd way. It's there, it's omnipresent a lot, but they sometimes don't delve and sit with it and be like, look how nightmarish this is. But in this case, it wouldn't let you look away, so to speak. If you're newer to the setting and you just see a lot of us, quote unquote, older lore enthusiasts pine on about the good old grim dark days or whatever, this book is kind of that, what is being referred to. So it's just a good example of that if you want it. All right, next we have the Star Child. This is kind of related to the Emperor's children, so to speak. Not the Legion, but the Emperor's literal children, which we talked about a bit earlier, the Sensei, in the second part of, in the first video, but second tier of the Iceberg. But anyway, the Star Child is an older lore bit about the Emperor's biological children, and them being involved in a possible resurrection of the Emperor from the Golden Throne. The Sensei, which are the Emperor's actual children, seem to be basically like worshipping the Star Child as a representation of this rebirth of the Emperor. And then apparently all the way down into the Indomitus Crusade, which is in current era, there are visions of a golden infant, which is interspersed with flashes of radiant light raising from a throne of light, being reported by astropathic choirs, beginning in Segmentum Solar. So it seems like there might be some mention or rumblings of the Star Child lore being repurposed into this, supposedly. But most of the lore is esoteric and still vague for this era. It was something in older lore drops that kind of got subsumed by other things like the Dark King and things like that. Next, we have the Dornian Heresy, which is essentially just a fan-made, alternate reality universe for Rogal Dorn falling to chaos and causing the Horus Heresy, but Dornian edition. This is a pretty well thought out alternate universe idea that has been built upon for a long time now. It's apparently officially abandoned by its creator, but I think a lot of the fans still kind of keep some of it going. You can find some art of this, but essentially it just is an alternate where you have like some of the traitors having been loyalists instead during the Horus Heresy, just intermixing things. So there's still a bit of a community around it, but it's not as strong apparently as another alternate heresy idea, which is the Roboutian heresy, which is about Robout Guilliman and the Ultramarines leading a betrayal of the Emperor instead. And apparently that's a lot more of a thing that is still active and much more fleshed out. And there is a lot of, artwork of that one, for sure. If you put in the Roboutian heresy online and just do like art, you're going to see a lot of fan art of that universe, and a lot of it's really cool, in my opinion. It's really fun to see Magnus the Red fulfilling more of his role without having been swindled by Tzeentch, and just things like that in it, but, it's not official and it's not real lore. It's just what people have come up with in a thoughtful way, which is always fun as well, though. Next, we have the Little Girl of the Crystal Maze. This is mostly just a reference to Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. It seems to basically depict Dorothy and her dog making it through a labyrinth of Tzeentch's design, and being the only one to do so. Now, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek suggestion that the Wizard of Oz itself takes place in the warp, and that everything in there was a Tzeentch hallucination, meant to, for some reason, try to drag down Dorothy. So, take what you will from it, but that's basically what this entry is about. And last, but certainly not least in this tier, is the Fenite Inquisitors. I was unaware of what these were. I'm pretty sure, maybe I've seen the name, but I certainly did not read what I just read about them and researched about them. This was quite a ride, so I recommend reading the wiki entries for this. And this stuff comes from, the lore around this faction of Inquisitors comes from the Dark Heresy and Dark Heresy RPG type of lore stuff, so I don't know how true to canon this is considered, but it's still really cool ideas. So, very brief overview of the Inquisition itself. It is the top authority in humanity, essentially. They have absolute authority, unquestionable authority from the Emperor himself. If an Inquisitor shows up and doesn't like the color of your shoes on a world, they can order the planet destroyed. That's the long and short of it for an Inquisitor. But within the Inquisition itself, there's certainly a pecking order, and different factions rise and fall in power over that institution. You have very puritanical factions and very radical factions. Some Inquisitors believe in using esoteric weaponry, like alien weaponry, and warp magic, demons even, in the form of demon hosts, things of that nature, to accomplish what they feel like is, by any means to to the end type of nth degree to accomplish their goal to serve the Emperor in their own mind. And since they all have the same absolute authority, they can all kind of make that decision on their own. And they do, you know, on occasion declare each other heretics and try to excommunicate each other from the Inquisition. And sometimes that happens, but oftentimes they just kind of have to learn to work together to greater degrees and just kind of say mean things to each other. Like, you know, you're a damned heretic, but I'm going to work with you, you know, because we need to serve the Emperor here. That kind of thing happens a lot in the Inquisition. But the Fenite Inquisitors take that to a whole new level. To the point where apparently radical fringe elements of the Inquisition look at them and go, you guys are nuts. What are you doing? And so, in a nutshell, what the Fenite Inquisitors are is they are kind of their own they're kind of their own Inquisition. They don't consider themselves part of the main Inquisition anymore. And their goal is some kind of odd transhumanist idea for humanity. They don't really see the Emperor as their master anymore, which is the main heresy. Like, as corrupt as some Inquisitors get, they still feel like they are serving the Emperor in what they are doing. That is a defining aspect of an Inquisitor, is most of them are absolutely loyal to the Emperor. It's just how they express that loyalty tends to differ from faction to faction. And, you know, then you got the difference of opinion between those factions. But the Fenite Inquisitors decided that they didn't like the Emperor, they didn't like the Imperium, they didn't like chaos, they didn't like any of it, and they want to use a combination of technology, the warp, Dark Age of technology. That was a weird double thing there, sorry about that. But anyway, they want to use all of that to essentially kind of further a transhumanist ideal for humanity, which is interesting to me. They want to empower humanity down a different path that is not wrapped up essentially in the current dogmatic approaches of the Imperium, where everything is through worship of the Emperor and by worship of the Emperor and dedication to the Emperor's memory. They decided to divest themselves of those loyalties. They also don't really believe in chaos as an answer either. So it's not as binary as we normally get, because sometimes Inquisitors will dabble with the warp stuff and they just end up worshiping chaos and causing chaos. And it's as simple as that. They get, made traitors and, hunted down. These Inquisitors were made traitors as well, but with a completely different direction in mind for humanity. And during a very bloody major purge and pretty big war against them, most of them were destroyed and killed. But some of them still exist, and the ones that still do exist seem to have some amount of significant power around themselves to still possibly be a player and threat in the future here. And I would like to see more of this. This would be a fascinating direction to take. In a way, I feel like the Beckwin trilogy, which deals with Inquisitors like Eisenhorn and Ravener, which are, some of the more famous Inquisitors that have stories around them. I would like to almost see, it involved with that stuff. Because some of what's going on in those books kind of has these vibes to me of like, we're going to try an esoteric direction to like solve humanity's problems. That isn't simply, just either doggedly following the Emperor's credo or chaos. It's something else. So very interesting stuff. I definitely recommend reading the stories that are entered in for like the background lore on the Fenite Inquisitor stuff. I might do a full video on them because they are fascinating to me, in my opinion. All right, next tier we have this is the last white tier, and then we get into the red tiers, which is some of what I've read in there is interesting, that's for sure. Most of it's actually not that bad, but I feel like some of the stuff actually in these white tiers have been a bit more of a doozy than what's in the red. But anyway, matters of opinion. So next tier, first we have the Golden Throne runs on Dark Eldar technology. I believe this has been proven true in a bit of lore in the recent past, to the degree that a task force led by an Inquisitor went to Kamarag to bring back through a pact some of their homunculus entities to look at the Golden Throne and consult with them on ways to keep it going, because the homunculi in Dark Eldar or Drukhari society are like the most ancient Eldari in existence, and they have a great grasp on ancient sciences, biologies, chemicals. Like, they know a lot. They're probably one of the deepest and most secretive and hoarding repositories of knowledge in the galaxy, but you're not going to get that from them. You would have to go to their covens, which are basically, take all that knowledge I just talked about and imagine booby traps made by these guys and try to get into their layers. Like, you're not going to make it very far. You'd have to be the Emperor himself or something like that to probably make any progress. But it'd be through a lot of brute force more than probably even seeing half the traps coming. But essentially, I believe this did occur where they brought back someone to at least look at the throne. And yes, this is a book I have not read. I just looked it up, and the Dark City is where they brought a homunculus to look at the Golden Throne. And here's a quote from the homunculus. He says to an Inquisitor, he says, "Shall I cushion the blow for you, or simply tell you here and now that the Emperor did not create the throne, but adapted it from 1,000 different stolen artifacts of older races?" And that's the main thing. This is pretty much well known, especially now, that with some of the later knowledge we got in the last books of the Horus Heresy and the last Siege novels, the End and the Death books, there was Malcador narrating and talking a lot about the Emperor in the past on things and how the Emperor found the throne and then started augmenting and using it for humanity's purposes. But the other thing too is that he mentions that that the Emperor didn't even know much about the throne itself, like exactly how it worked. But here's the thing. A homunculus is one of the most untrustworthy beings ever. So, this thing is, these things are not to be trusted, and for their own selfish purposes, which they are a very selfish being, for their own selfish purposes, they could be totally straight up lying to humanity here. But to a degree, they also hate chaos and would want it defeated or held back, which is what the Golden Throne and humanity ultimately is doing. So I could see both ways here, that the homunculus is being 100% honest, or it's being half honest and trying to cause a bit of its own turmoil for its own esoteric goals. But ultimately, the lore, the idea that it runs on Drukhari technology is not true as far as we know. It's just that the Drukhari, being such an ancient form of Eldari, that they might just have in their oldest members of society, who are tens of thousands of years old, they might know a bit about at least parts of the technology where it came from. Alright, next is Sanguinius killed Horus and was put down by the Emperor. This is 1000% was a fan theory for years, and it was proven false by the events of the End and the Death books, which just finished up early this year, finishing the 20-plus year arc of the Horus Heresy novels. Sanguinius gave it his best against Horus, and then Horus handily defeated Sanguinius, and that was it. There was no Sanguinius defeating Horus, subversion of expectation or anything like that. Horus was very much the nightmare that we were all expecting to see, and he very handily, utterly brutalized Sanguinius eventually, after letting Sanguinius take a fair shake at it. But no, this is not something that happened, as much as some people hoped for it to happen, I guess. Next, we have the Hrud, our humans fleeing back in time. So the Hrud are a very cool alien species that I talked about a while ago in a Xenos video about lesser known species. The Hrud have a very weird technology, or aura around them to where everything rapidly ages around them. They basically have the power of entropy around them, so to speak, a entropic field. And they are very hard to fight because of that. And this was a very well depicted situation with the Iron Warriors Legion having facing up against them. And the Hrud were apparently going along what were being called migratory routes to some unknown destination. And the Iron Warriors were trying to stop them from traveling. And it just wasn't going very well for the Iron Warriors. And the theory of them being humans actually comes from a Mechanicum member with Perturabo and the Iron Warriors. Yeah, this comes from the book Hammer of Olympia, which is all about the Perturabo and his legion fighting the Hrud. And there is a Mechanicus member named Zurin or Tizurin, something like that, who his speculation is he thinks it's possible the Hrud are humans from like the end of time itself, and that they're traveling back from the future because it's too horrible, something like that. Because Perturabo, to that theory, Perturabo says, and I quote, "That is madness. If that were so, why would they come here?" And Perturabo is not a fool. He's a bit of a fool in some ways, but more on an emotional level. Intellectually, he is one of the more intelligent Primarchs, for sure. And so he's just thinking logically, like, this era kind of sucks. Why would they come this direction? You know, like, look at the nightmares we are, you know, that sort of thing. And the Mechanicum guy, Tizurin, basically just says, you know, who knows what horrors await in the long dark reaches in the future here. So, basically, you know, like, that's the only place where that theory comes from. I like the idea of it. It adds some cool ideas for this species. The Hrud are actually technically repurposed Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy, from what I've read. And some of the looks of the Hrud, if you look at some of their tech stuff, some of it kind of has Skaven, what do you call it? Their kind of green energy, electric energy kind of vibe to it a little bit. But instead of having the Skaven, they decided to turn them into the Hrud instead of have the Skaven be in both universes. And then there's some lore surrounding the Hrud that they might be a offshoot of the Eldar, a creation of the Old Ones as well. They seem to worship a pantheon, and some of their religious pantheon lore overlaps with similarities to the Eldari pantheon. So there's some things with them that are interesting. Nothing seems to point to what this theory is portending other than what this specific member of the Mechanicus thought. Alright, next is the Horus Heresy was expected but didn't go as planned. A lot of people still believe this, that the Emperor was planning for the Horus Heresy the entire time and expected his sons to fall to chaos and fight him. He just wasn't sure on the exact timeline for that. I disagree with this for a number of reasons, mostly just from new lore we got from the End and the Death novels specifically, where we have Malcador talking and narrating a lot in those books about just the plans the Emperor had, and in this setting he is musing on and narrating on this stuff. He has no reason to be hiding or sowing deceit, which Malcador was definitely a creature of secrecy and misinformation, but in the particular situation that he found himself in towards the end of the novels here of the Horus, or towards the end of the Horus Heresy itself, he had no reason to be lying. He was on the Golden Throne and basically kind of going through his memories and, you know, talking about it in that context. So within that context, he basically says that there was a place for all the Primarchs after the Heresy, or not after the Heresy, after the Great Crusade, and that you know, they had plans to you know, have them fulfill different roles within the Imperium after they stabilized and conquered the galaxy. There was no mass purge planned, like some people think. There was no destruction of the Primarchs at very least. Who knows about the Space Marines themselves? But the Primarchs were hoped to lead humanity in different ways after they were generals, helping to shape the very foundations of the Imperium. Now, the closest thing to this that we really get as a possibility is that the Emperor... So, the novel The Master of Mankind is very important for understanding the Emperor. I would definitely recommend reading that book if you have not, and not going off of people's theories and opinions on Reddit and places like that. I feel like a lot of people make uninformed speculations on the Emperor based upon what they hear other people saying, not from like the actual books where we get the Emperor speaking. And Master of Mankind is mostly a discussion between the Emperor and one of his chief custodians, Ra. And essentially one of the most succinct ways the Emperor describes his power to see the future is when he shows Ra a cliff face and the top of a cliff across like a shallow sea, essentially. And he says, he points to it and says to Ra, your destination is to get to the top of that cliff. That's your goal. You can see it. Go do it. And so Ra tries, and the path is just very treacherous to climb up that sheer cliff and get up there, and he fails and he falls. And essentially the Emperor is just like, I can see the future that I want. I know what it is, and I know what I need to do to get there, but I can't foresee every pitfall. And in that way, I think that you could depict what the Emperor is saying here is not that he didn't think it wasn't possible the heresy could happen, but that there was many different pitfalls that could have happened, and he just didn't know which one is going to rear its head. It's almost like if you've ever played a game called Stellaris, which is like a 4X space empire building game. You've probably heard of it or played it if you're listening to this video. But in that game, you have several different crisis situations that can happen during a playthrough, and it's at random what's going to happen. And after you've played it a few times, you know what the options are that could happen. But you don't want any of them to necessarily happen, but one's going to. And then you have to kind of try to prep ahead of time to make sure that doesn't utterly destroy your empire. And so in that sense, I feel like the Emperor I think he saw chaos as one of those types of situations, and he saw, his sons being corrupted by chaos as a option, a possibility, and that he could see other possibilities too. And that was just one of them that ended up happening, versus other ones he might have been more prepared to combat against. Certainly from what Malcador says in the End and the Death volumes, definitely puts, for me, a rest the idea that they were callously kind of just expecting to cull the Primarchs, or even just, expected them to turn. I don't think they expected any of that, not with the amount of damage that it caused. The Emperor even eventually tells Ra that he doesn't know, what happens next anymore, and that chills Ra to the bone, that the Emperor that he loves and would give his life for doesn't really know what the future holds at all anymore after, several events play out with the Golden Throne and things like that over the course of that book. All right, last but not least is The Shape of the Nightmare to Come, which is apparently a fanfic idea for the 50th millennium versus the 40th, or the 41st. And it essentially just kind of goes off the rails even more than 40k tends to. And so I'm only going to highlight a few things I found in a Reddit post that are apparently in this speculation, in this fanfic idea. But essentially, here is some highlights. The Emperor becomes a chaos god of order and goes full Old Kron, or Old Necron style, extermination of life to bring order to the galaxy, which, like a lot of people have often thought of the Emperor as like a chaos god of order, so to speak, so that tracks. Sicarius taking over Ultramar and making a personality cult. That's an interesting one. Yarick literally becoming Hitler and running over thousands of civilians in his Bane blade. Thousands are a chump change. Come on. You got to be more over the top than that. But still, just the imagery of that. Man, okay. Dante succumbs to the Black Rage, which sounds fun. Black Templars go insane and continue crusading against anyone. Also sounds like a fun way to make the Black Templar more crazy than they already are. Dozens of petty Imperiums that are detailed greatly. So just different breakups of the Imperium that have their own flavor of demented insanity, I'm sure. This one might take the cake, though. The Custodes literally have to fight a demon engine with the corpse of the Emperor nailed on it. What would that even look like? Like, my goodness. And then the Tyranids and Orcs joining to form a new superorganism and wipe out the Orcs and the remaining Tyranids, literally flee the galaxy to avoid fighting this hybrid organism, essentially. That is a fun idea for sure. I don't see it happening, but I like the idea of it. And then the last thing they have listed here is Imperial Fists dig in. That's all. Pretty much the only sane ones left. So you got, some of the last, grounded factions basically just kind of like hunkering down and trying to hold on, so to speak. And that's really it on that. I'm not going to dive straight into that because it's just pure fan fiction. And that's fun, but it's not lore. And this is a lore channel. So that's it for this one. I'm going to do the last 3, I think, in the next, it's technically 2, I guess. The next 2 tiers, the last tiers in the next video, likely in a day or 2 from today. So as always, if you've liked this and you have not subscribed, please consider it. I appreciate your time here. If you are subscribed already, welcome back. Thank you for being here for as long as you have been, or as short as you have been. Either way, I appreciate you. And we will look forward to seeing each other again in the next video here. And in the future, I will be live streaming the new Space Marine game as well. So hopefully I'll discuss and talk with you on a stream there when that is out, so we can take a look at that together. Hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next video. Talk to you soon. Thank you very much.